I'm sure that many of us over the past few weeks have turned to cinema, to music, to television, to literature, maybe even, in order to entertain us or to give us other worlds to escape into or to enter while we are constrained in our own local environments. So this morning I was thinking it might be fun to kind of talk about cinema in particular, and I'll give 10 different ways to appreciate cinema. Now, I want to preface all of this by saying it's not prescriptive, it's descriptive. What that means is I am not telling you how you should watch a movie. I am telling you 10 different ways I think you can if you want to, or 10 different ways you might already be doing without maybe being so conscious about it. So I guess this is like an exercise in bringing into the regular kind of the front of your consciousness the different ways we might already be interacting with cinema and other ways we can kind of try for other times. And obviously there aren't only 10. These are just 10 that first come to mind, and I just don't want this video to be too long, so I chose 10. And I'm operating from a very loose theoretical framework of sorts, but I don't want to get too technical with this stuff. But very loosely, I'm trying to think of it from a spectrum, from an axis of personal involvement in one side, and the other side is personal detachment. So there are ways to watch a movie where you're completely involved and completely detached. Yeah, just like I guess what I just said. So very generally, I'll be going from pure involvement to pure detachment, and it's not going to be very it's not perfect, but it generally you can kind of get a sense of how everything kind of differs in that aspect, and that one specific kind of axis of sorts. So I'm going to go through each of the 10. I'll give some examples of how maybe I would have, or maybe some films that for me personally, when I think of it, or when I watched or experienced that film, I had that particular way of appreciating the movie closer to the forefront of my mind. And maybe that will be better, and you'll get a better sense of contrast for each of them. Again, these are not the only 10, there are many more. So yeah, I'm going to start. If I had, more patience, I'd probably make this into one of those video essays, but I don't have the patience for that. So, if you're interested, it'll be nice. I think it's quite interesting to consider, and to, how we appreciate and understand and engage with the arts, I think is very important, especially when maybe over the past few weeks we're doing it more than we may normally be doing it. So might as well be thinking a little bit more about how we interact with the arts. Okay, so the first one is total personal involvement. So again, we're using two axes. So the first one is total personal involvement. What I mean by this refers to watching a movie, and maybe you're choosing a specific character to follow, and when you watch the movie, maybe your appreciation and your understanding of the film is very tied to the fate of that character. So for example, for me personally, a film that I think of is, for example, Before Sunrise. There's a film called Before Sunrise and Before Sunset, and when I watch the films, my appreciation for the movie comes from the fact that I find so much similarity in myself with one of the characters in the film. So when I watch it, I feel like it's like an extension of daydreaming to the extent that I watched it as an extension of me putting myself into a character that very much resembles me, and loving the film to the extent that I like how the character's fate or the character's direction moves, because it's like an experience for me personally. So that's that kind of thing where maybe you choose a character and you stick to that character, you root for one character, and kind of maybe if you don't enjoy the movie, it may be out of a result of maybe it's the character that you chose that you feel most connected to, doesn't have the best of kind of endings of sorts, maybe. Number two, a focus on plot. So the first maybe focus on character, the second would be a focus on plot, maybe multiple characters. So this is, for example, when someone says, "Oh, I love the movie because it's such a great plot." So this is a bit more abstracted from individual characters. I want to preface that the further I go into this list, some of it may be more confusing or abstract, or maybe hard to follow. And if you are unable to follow, maybe that's probably my fault. But I think it's not too difficult. But anyway, so number two is plot. So maybe when one enjoys a movie for its plot, it may have something to do with obviously the story, but also there's a sense of balance of things, of maybe a sense of justice, maybe a sense that each character somehow goes to the ends that they may that seems appropriate for those characters. So I think a lot of plot. So for me personally, I don't really think of plot so much when watching a movie, but this is something very much tied to say the screenplay. Uh, and maybe an example of a movie that I would have said that I enjoyed a lot because of its plot. Maybe you can think of maybe Knives Out from last year, or Parasite even, where there's a very nice sense of balance and justice to the whole, the whole structure. And so I may be involved with multiple characters, and I find that the way each character is portrayed and where it kind of ends for each one feels appropriate. So I like the movie for its plot. Number three, it's a bit, uses for the first of the two, it uses the first two, but it is an added sense of intertextual context, meaning I am comparing my experience of this film with an experience with another specific film or another book. So for example, with an adaptation. Say for example, I'm watching the Harry Potter series. When I watch Harry Potter, it's very personal for me because I have a history with reading the books, but when I watch the movies, a lot of, at least when I was younger, when I'd watch the movies, a lot of it would come into me trying to see how the interaction between the book and the film and how it was adapted and how different things came into fruition. But it could be also different things, not just in adaptations. It could be in remakes, for example. Maybe I'm watching the third Spider-Man reboot, and I'm trying to compare how it was rebooted to, say, the original Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, or maybe even the an animated version of Spider-Man of sorts, and all these things. I would be thinking of I'll think of the movie and its characters, but I'd be also thinking about other characters in a similar vein to that, and I'll also be thinking of other films in a similar vein to that, or I can think of source material. So it's all intertextual, and it may be interrelated. Again, these categories are not in their own worlds. They all interconnect, but this is just another way. So third again is intertextual context. This reminds me of this character from another movie, or this plot reminds me of this other plot, and I'm thinking about how they differ maybe to some degree, but a lot of it again it's connecting one or two movies with each other, combining the two, or movie and book or whatever it is. Number four is engaging with intertextual context, but more related to craft or elements of the film. So when I say craft, I'm referring to acting, I'm referring to directing, I'm referring to writing, I'm referring to cinematography. So this fourth way of appreciating movie may come in the sense of I'm watching a film, but the context comes with a realization and understanding that I'm watching a fiction thing, I'm watching a film. So maybe, for example, I'd be watching The Wolf of Wall Street, and I'll be thinking, wow, I'm such a big fan of Leonardo DiCaprio, as well as Martin Scorsese, and when I watch this film, I'm thinking of the career of Leonardo DiCaprio. Say, for example, I watch Wolf of Wall Street again tonight. I might be thinking of it, I'll be thinking of his performance, in maybe in comparison to his performance in, say, The Revenant, where he won the Oscar, or maybe, Titanic, or Blood Diamond, or The Departed, or whatever it is, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And maybe I'll be thinking of Martin Scorsese, I'll be thinking of how The Wolf of Wall Street may be connected to The Goodfellas, or The Casino, or, Taxi Driver, and I'll be making all these little comparisons of sorts. So it's intertextual, but it's with multiple performances or films, and it's very much about maybe a specific part of that film, and we kind of look at the laterally. So again, we talk about Leonardo DiCaprio, maybe Matthew McConaughey. Think of specific actors and seeing how their performance differs from their own kind of bevy of performances over time, or different directors and maybe all their films, and you're looking for its place in relation to those others that are connected to it in that sense. That's the fourth one, and the fifth one would be engaging with historical context. So again, you can using the first four, but for the fifth one, it requires extra textual understanding of it. So maybe I'm watching a movie, and I think of the historical time that's being depicted in the film, and seeing about what is the movie showing, and about the historical context, about when it was made, and what its decisions in showing specific things, and what that really says about I guess that time period. So maybe you think of accuracy. Maybe you think of these things that are not really connected. So for example, how do we differentiate this from the others? For example, I think when I meant plot, you focus on plot. I specifically mean in a way that is disconnected from historical context. So for example, if I were to watch a movie about the Balkan War, and I really love what happened in the movie. I love the plot. I will have access to, you know, plot and appreciation of the specifics of the plot, or what exactly happens, the relationships between the different characters. But maybe if I was aware of the historical context of, say, the Balkan Wars and how maybe it led up to the First World War, then I will be watching the movie, even if it's not consciously, even subconsciously, I'll be considering how the film depicts maybe the precursors to the First World War. Even though it's not in the film, I think of things outside the film and how things may be leading up to different aspects out of the film. So, for example, a movie that I think about is maybe there's this Filipino movie called Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos, which by Mario O'Hara from the mid-70s, and that movie. Specifically, when if someone else watches it, maybe they won't be thinking too much about the context, but because it's from the Philippines, I think about it's about the World War II and the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. So I watch the film and I'm aware of all the historical context. So whether I'm consciously or subconsciously thinking about it, it comes out in my appreciation or understanding of the film even. So this is historical context. Number 6 is, I'm gonna call it a meta-historical context. So what I'm referring to meta historical context, I'm referring to it's history, but history within the art form itself. So film history. So the next 3 or 4 ways of appreciating a film is these are things that maybe are more accessible, or you engage with them a lot when you go into, say, film studies, or you go to university. They love thinking in these terms. But if you don't have any awareness of it, it may seem kind of foreign. So the 6th one, I would say meta-historical context. I would say, so for example, I'm watching a movie and I'm thinking about it's placed within a further film historical context. Or maybe I'm thinking of it in terms of its further influence in the future to other films. Maybe I'm thinking of it as how it kind of subverts the genre it's in, the filmic genre it's in. So for example, there's a French movie called Breathless, or À bout de souffle. It came out in 1960, and it is a film by Jean-Luc Godard, and it's one of the things that it makes it special is understanding its place in his filmic history and how it is perhaps, it's reactionary, but at the same time, it does things with filmic language that is quite different, and it breaks different classical film rules that maybe you won't really understand if you're not familiar with that. Or maybe when I think of Breathless, I can't watch it without thinking of the French film cinema of the 50s and 60s and how it leads into this very widespread, and one of the films that leads into just the predominance of the French New Wave, right? So when I watch the movie, I can't help but think of all that stuff. It's not, I can do it consciously, but subconsciously I'm also aware of the French New Wave, and I think of all the different, things going behind the scenes with a movie like Breathless. Let's see, that's number 6. So number 7 is critique. So critique is thematic, but it can be tied to historical critique. For some sense, it could be like the film's raison d'être. What is the film? What is its reason to be? What is it criticizing? What are its political motives? So when I watch it, it's like watching a movie and thinking, what is the movie trying to say? So we're a bit more abstracted from specifics of like plot and character and all these different things, and we're kind of think of like, what is the movie trying to put forth into the world? What are its moral precepts? What does the film feel like? What is it? Is it reacting to a specific kind of historical event, or is it trying to criticize a specific time? Maybe it's showing a time in the past because it's trying to criticize the present, a specific aspect of the present. So all these different things you think about when you talk about how a film is critiquing things. Again, like what is it trying to say? So for example, a movie I enjoy a lot from 1975 or 6 is called Manila in the Claws of Light by Lina Broca. And when I watch that film, I think about it's a lot of critiques on, say, capitalism or Philippine society in general, or Manila-centeredness of things, and the corruption of youth and corruption of innocence and stuff like that. All these different themes. It's more thematic, and it's criticizing specific modes of cultural thinking and so forth. And so that's a way of thinking about a film. Appreciating a film, again, is by looking at what the film is trying to say. So it's very much in the perspective of thinking of it as being created by some collection of people, and assuming that they are trying to say something politically. which often is the case for some at least. Number 8 is a focus that is totally technical. So we're getting close to the end of total detachment. Right now it's totally technical. Maybe it's more about crafts. So for example, I'm watching a movie where I am not even anymore thinking about plot or characters. I don't really care about historical context or anything. What I'm watching when I'm thinking of the movie is, how is it made? Maybe this comes from maybe if you are involved with the creation of cinema, you're more aware of these aspects. And you think of while watching a movie, how did they shoot that scene? How did they coax this performance out of that actor? So it's very much in the perspective of creation, whether it's special effects or whatnot. So if, a movie I may think about when I think of this is, for example, Mad Max Fury Road. It's an action movie from 2016 or 17, and when I watched the movie personally, my experience of it was just thinking, how do they make any of this? How are they staging these absolutely kind of outrageous action sequences, and how, that's the main question in my head. I don't remember much about, I remember what the plot is, but I didn't care much about the plot or the characters, but I was thinking personally, how did they stage these things? I had to immediately go to the behind-the-scenes featurettes after the film, because I was just so amazed by that. So that's a way, totally technical. That's one way to look at a film. Now, we're almost at the end, number 9. Number 9 is I'm going to call spectacle. It's what pure spectacle, maybe some people could call it brainlessness or, popcorn cinema of sorts. No, you're not thinking. It's just pure entertainment. Maybe you're just focusing on action, thrill, laughter, the constancy of different things going on in the film and just entertaining you in a very consistent way. So again, it may be connected to some of the other things, but when I think of spectacle, I just think of, for me personally, with the movies that arouse the most spectacle for me are the Star Wars films, for example. So when I watch a Star Wars movie, I know many people complain about plot or character development, things like that. For me personally, I don't really care. I'm really there in order to be immersed in an environment filled with flashing shootouts and fighter jet things. That's what I get drawn into, big action sequences when I watch a Star Wars film. So my appreciation for those films come directly from its ability to kind of create spectacle. For others, it may be something like, the last Avengers film or, things like that. But that's how it is for me. And again, that's number 9, because I feel like it's not anymore about me being personally involved with any of the things. It's more of me stepping back, turning my brain off, and just, watching things blow up of sorts. And it's entertaining, and it's a way to appreciate a film that it doesn't have to be on its own, but it can be interrelated with many of the others, and it can be further up or further higher in priority or further down. Number 10 is an extension of spectacle I'm going to call total detachment. So this is watching film as a play of light and shadow. Thinking of it as a play of light and shadow, sound and silence. It's maybe a bit more abstract, but it's thinking of a film in the sense in which it's the elements that comprise the film interrelate with one another in a way that creates maybe something more than the sum of its parts, or it's just you think of it more like music, more like classical music or symphonies, where maybe it's completely selfless. It's not about me anymore. I'm just observing how the film. So maybe, for example, if you watch an older film noir or something, you may be thinking of how just interesting how light and shadow are playing with each other in a way that you don't really see with color cinema. Or maybe if you watch more abstract cinema, maybe something like Stan Brakhage or some more experimental cinema, you'll be looking at it more just observing the interrelation between elements in a way that's very abstracted. You're not really there anymore. You're just kind of looking at, it's as if all the elements that maybe if I mentioned in the previous parts, whether it's relation between characters or music, or plot, or even just the lights and sounds, they're all kind of interrelated in a way that is very musical, and it's very it's beautiful in its own sense, in the way it connects with one another. And it's a very abstract way of appreciating cinema, but it's something that it can be fun as well if you are able to kind of fall into that sense of mind flow of sorts. But it's sort of an extension of spectacle, but it's more, I guess it's more abstracted to things like the very specific elements like light and sound, stuff like that. There are 10 ways, and you can think of it in, there are many other ways, of course, right? And the purpose of this is merely kind of to show that, there, when you watch one movie, you are consciously thinking about some of these, and some of the others are in the subconscious based on our initial understanding, our initial base of knowledge, or whether it's knowledge about the film industry or film history or history in general. And there are many other ways, such as you can look at things in the sense of film theory, or in the sense of camp or theatricality, or maybe specific ideas or ideologies, or how it pushes back on or pushes forward, say, ideas like LGBT, things like that. Or you can think of it in the perspective of, say, economic decisions that come into the creation of the movie, and or maybe in the ways at which it politically seems to defer to certain countries, maybe being more pro-China or pro United States. There are all these different ways we can appreciate a film. I just gave kind of a short 10, and I want to just also add that these are not fixed points. When I talk about these 10, these are spectrums on their own. Each of them has an axis of like least to most, and so this is not really 10 ways to appreciate a film. These are 10 different axes that interrelate with one another, and we kind of fall somewhere in this kind of 10-dimensional kind of spectrum, or even more dimensional spectrum with every film you watch. But I think that it's kind of interesting to have more of a conscious experience of a film and a subconscious experience of a film, and maybe thinking of one of the 10, and maybe when we go into another film, we can choose one of these 10 or more, and see how it changes how we appreciate a film, even a film we've already seen. This is a way we can watch a film again. Maybe, for example, we can watch a film like meta-historically and think of how this. Maybe I'm watching a Akira Kurosawa movie. I can be watching, say, Madadayo or something, or one of his later movies, and I can think, this is made by the director late in his life, and he is reaching death, and he's making a movie about celebrating the end of someone's life. Or maybe maybe that's, it adds different layers. It's all about layers and things like that. Or maybe I'm watching a film and I know it's the filmmaker's debut, or it's the debut for a certain actor or actress, and I can see I can watch the film and I think of it in the wider spectrum, wider scheme of like how they ended up turning out. Maybe I'm watching a River Phoenix movie and I'm aware of that he dies very young, or Anton Yelchin, and I can think of, I'm watching a film and I have more, maybe I'm getting goosebumps watching it because I'm watching it thinking, or a James Dean movie, and thinking, this person won't have much more time to live. And we can think of it in terms of ironies or satires and all these other things, and there's many ways to appreciate a film. So maybe the next time you watch a movie, think more consciously about why you like the movie, and which of the many methods of watching it did you employ consciously, and maybe think about subconsciously, maybe there are some things here that led to maybe you disliking a movie, whether it's like a personal experience you had that you don't really appreciate, or maybe you don't agree with some of its political ideologies. So that's I hope if you watch all of this, you must be interested in some of this, but I hope maybe this is somewhat interesting for someone out there. Anyway, that's all I have for now.